Jessica and Tyler seemed like an ordinary stepmother and stepson living in a quiet Florida suburb, but behind closed doors, their lives hid secrets that would shock an entire community. What began as subtle tension and strange behavior soon escalated into a scandal that no one could have anticipated. The Florida suburb where this story began looked like the perfect place to raise a family. Rows of pastel-colored houses with neatly trimmed lawns and palm trees swaying in the breeze gave it an almost postcard-like charm. Neighbors waved at each other during evening walks, and the streets were quiet except for the occasional laughter of children playing. In this setting, the family at the center of the story appeared ordinary, even ideal. The father worked long hours in a nearby office. The teenage son attended high school, and the stepmom managed the household, often seen running errands or chatting with other parents during school pickup. She had a reputation for being warm and sociable, always ready to host a barbecue or volunteer for local events. From the outside, there seemed to be nothing amiss. Despite the outward appearance of normalcy, subtle cracks were beginning to show. The teenager, who had once been cheerful and outgoing, started to withdraw from friends and extracurricular activities. Teachers noted a quiet tension in his demeanor, a reluctance to participate or share what was troubling him. At home, small changes were noticed as well. The stepmom became increasingly protective of her stepson, checking his phone and questioning his whereabouts more often than seemed usual. Conversations that had once been casual now carried an undercurrent of anxiety. Friends and neighbors began to sense that something was different, though no one could quite put their finger on what had shifted. Rumors began circulating, whispered in grocery store aisles and over backyard fences. Some neighbors speculated about the closeness between the stepmom and her stepson, while others wondered if the teenager was being unfairly restricted or pressured. Despite these whispers, many dismissed the changes as typical teenage rebellion or the stress of blended family dynamics. Yet, there was a tension that lingered like a shadow, a feeling that something unseen was shaping the household in ways that were deeply troubling. The family's interactions became more guarded. The stepmom's smiles, once genuine and welcoming, now seemed calculated. She maintained a friendly exterior for visitors but remained intensely watchful of her stepson's movements. At school, the teenager began avoiding social interactions, and his academic performance, once solid, began to fluctuate. Teachers and counselors noticed the subtle signs of distress and grew concerned. Social media posts, though casual, hinted at a household under strain, with cryptic captions and selective photos that painted a picture far from the cheerful reality neighbors assumed. It was during this period that the first formal concerns were raised. A teacher, noticing persistent signs of anxiety and secrecy in the teen, contacted the school counselor. Conversations revealed that the teenager felt trapped in a situation he didn't understand or know how to explain. Authorities were not involved yet, but the early signs suggested that this was not simply a matter of ordinary family tension. The stage was being set for a deeper investigation, one that would reveal hidden truths behind the seemingly calm and sunny exterior of this Florida suburb. What appeared as a normal, even idyllic life was slowly unraveling, revealing a tension and secrecy that would shock the community in ways no one anticipated. Suspicion began to take hold as small details in the household's daily routines started to stand out. The teenager's behavior became more erratic, and it was no longer easy to attribute it to normal adolescent moods. He began avoiding friends, declining invitations, and even skipping events that he had previously enjoyed. Teachers noticed the changes during class, observing a quietness that seemed almost unnatural. The boy's attention wandered, and his previously active participation in group projects dwindled. At home, the stepmom maintained a careful watch, often hovering in the background during family interactions. Friends began to sense a strain. Although they couldn't identify its source, social gatherings became rare, And when they occurred, the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable, a stark contrast to the lively events she had once hosted. Neighbors and family friends began sharing observations quietly, comparing notes on small but unusual behaviors. The stepmom seemed to have an almost obsessive interest in the teenager's daily activities. Phone calls, texts, and social media messages were monitored with an intensity that went beyond typical parental concern. Any attempt by the teenager to speak freely about his day or social life was met with sharp questions or subtle disapproval. This pattern created an invisible barrier between him and the outside world, leaving him isolated and increasingly anxious. Friends at school noticed the change, too, seeing him grow more withdrawn and secretive. Teachers grew concerned, recognizing the signs of emotional stress and the potential for manipulation or control that extended beyond what was typical for a blended family. Authorities were drawn in after a counselor at the school reported consistent warning signs. The counselor had noticed the teen's reluctance to interact with peers, his sudden secrecy, and his heightened anxiety when questioned about life at home. These reports triggered an initial review of the household by Child Protective Services. Investigators began quietly observing, paying attention to routines, interactions, and any irregular patterns that could provide insight into the family's dynamics. What started as subtle signs of tension grew into a structured investigation. It became clear that something unusual was happening behind closed doors, and the situation demanded closer scrutiny. Digital evidence became a significant factor in the growing suspicion. Social media activity, text messages, and online interactions were analyzed carefully. While nothing immediately incriminating appeared to the casual observer, trained eyes began to notice patterns that raised concern. Certain messages suggested secrecy, emotional manipulation, and unusual closeness, though the specifics were hidden beneath layers of casual language. These small clues built a larger picture, indicating that the stepmom's behavior toward her stepson went beyond what could be considered appropriate for a typical family relationship. As the investigation progressed, the community remained unaware of the full scope of what was unfolding. Parents, neighbors, and friends speculated quietly, sensing that the teen was under stress, but no one could see the full picture. The household maintained an outward appearance of normalcy, masking the growing tension and the subtle control exerted by the stepmom. Each day brought new signs of strain, further fueling suspicion among those who had access to the teenager's experiences. What began as small concerns about emotional well-being was quickly transforming into a serious investigation that would soon uncover shocking truths about the family dynamic and the stepmom's actions, setting the stage for revelations that no one in the community could have anticipated. Weeks of careful observation and investigation finally began to yield results. Detectives had been meticulously reviewing the household's routines, digital footprints, and social interactions, piecing together fragments of evidence that, when combined, suggested something far more troubling than anyone had initially suspected. The teenager, already withdrawn and anxious, became increasingly reluctant to spend time alone in shared spaces, signaling to investigators that the environment at home was more controlled than previously understood. Authorities paid close attention to patterns in his behavior: sudden mood shifts, avoidance of certain rooms, and a visible discomfort when the stepmom entered each detail, painting a clearer picture of the tension within the home. Digital communications provided key insights. Messages on social media platforms, though seemingly casual, hinted at a secretive relationship between the stepmom and her stepson. Investigators found coded language and hidden exchanges that suggested an unusual closeness. While none of the content was explicit in nature, the context and timing of the interactions raised serious red flags. The stepmom had carefully curated her online presence, presenting an image of a friendly, outgoing parent, but behind the screen, the evidence suggested manipulation and control. This careful balance between public normalcy and private secrecy created a challenging but revealing trail for detectives. Physical surveillance further confirmed investigators' suspicions. Patterns of movement within the house, the teenager's avoidance of certain areas, and the stepmom's constant monitoring were all documented. Observers noted that ordinary household routines had been subtly altered, with the stepmom controlling access to rooms, objects, and even casual interactions with friends and neighbors. What had once appeared as typical parental oversight was revealed to be much more calculated, designed to isolate the teenager and maintain strict control over his environment. This level of observation and detail provided a critical foundation for authorities to pursue further legal action. The arrest itself was sudden and dramatic, shocking the quiet neighborhood. Law enforcement officers approached the household early one morning, executing their investigation with precision. Neighbors watched from a distance, stunned at the sight of police activity in a community that had prided itself on safety and familiarity. News quickly spread, and the family, once considered ordinary and well-respected, became the focus of intense public scrutiny. The teenager was placed under protective custody, his well-being the immediate priority. Experts were brought in to assess the emotional impact of the events, recognizing that the strain and secrecy had likely left lasting effects. The stepmom's initial statements during questioning were carefully measured, attempting to present her actions as innocuous. Yet inconsistencies in her story and discrepancies revealed through the digital and observational evidence painted a different picture. Investigators were able to cross-reference behaviors, messages, and patterns, gradually uncovering the scope of manipulation that had gone unnoticed for months. The shocking nature of the discovery rippled through the community, leaving neighbors, friends, and even extended family struggling to reconcile the woman they had known with the reality emerging through the investigation. Each new piece of evidence pushed the story further into the public eye, setting the stage for revelations that would ultimately culminate in a confession that no one in the suburb could have anticipated. After days of questioning and review of the evidence, the stepmom finally began to speak, her demeanor a mixture of defiance and resignation. What she revealed stunned investigators and the community alike. She admitted to a long history of controlling behavior within the household, describing patterns that extended beyond normal parental concern. Her confession detailed how she had meticulously managed every aspect of the teenager's life, from monitoring digital communications to controlling his daily routines, friendships, and interactions outside the home. She acknowledged that her influence had been more invasive than anyone could have imagined, shaping not only his environment but his perceptions of trust, privacy, and personal boundaries. The confession exposed a complex web of psychological manipulation. She described creating situations that fostered dependency, isolating the teenager from peers, and cultivating an intense focus on herself as the central figure in his life. While she did not provide explicit details of any illegal acts, the patterns she admitted to revealed a household dominated by secrecy, fear, and control. Investigators recognized that this behavior, though subtle in appearance, had profound emotional and psychological consequences for the teenager. The stepmom's ability to maintain a public facade of normalcy had allowed her to continue this manipulation for months, highlighting the insidious nature of such situations and the challenges in detecting them before they escalate. Experts called in to analyze the confession emphasized the psychological complexity at play. They explained that emotional manipulation in family settings can often appear harmless or even caring to outsiders, masking deeper dysfunction. The stepmom's acknowledgement of her controlling behavior provided critical insight into the mechanisms that allowed her to maintain dominance over the household. Authorities were able to connect this confession to previously gathered evidence, including surveillance observations, messages, and behavioral inconsistencies, forming a cohesive narrative that clarified the teenager's experience. The community reacted with a mix of disbelief, fear, and outrage. Neighbors who had once admired the stepmom for her involvement in local events now struggled to reconcile that image with the manipulative behavior she had confessed to. Friends and extended family wrestled with the implications, questioning how such control could exist unnoticed in an ordinary suburban environment. Social media and local news outlets amplified the story, dissecting every detail and raising broader discussions about family dynamics, emotional manipulation, and the importance of vigilance in protecting teenagers from hidden forms of control. The teenager, placed under protective care, began receiving counseling and support to process the events. Professionals emphasized the importance of rebuilding trust and establishing healthy boundaries, recognizing that the emotional impact of such manipulation could linger for years. The stepmom's confession, while shocking, also served as a turning point, allowing authorities to provide targeted assistance and ensure the teenager's safety. The revelations forced the community to confront uncomfortable truths about appearances versus reality and underscored the necessity of paying attention to subtle warning signs. By admitting to the manipulative patterns and the psychological influence she exerted, the stepmom inadvertently exposed the hidden mechanisms that had caused significant harm, creating a framework for understanding and recovery in the aftermath of the scandal. The aftermath of the investigation and confession brought lasting changes to the family and the community. The courtroom proceedings were intense, drawing attention from local media and residents alike. The stepmom faced charges related to emotional manipulation and controlling behavior, and while the details were kept sensitive due to the teenager's age, the legal consequences were significant. The trial unfolded with careful attention to evidence collected during the investigation, including digital communications, surveillance reports, and her own confession. Witnesses, including school counselors and experts in family dynamics, testified about the psychological impact of her behavior, emphasizing how deeply it had affected the teenager's sense of safety, trust, and autonomy. The teenager received ongoing support and counseling, guided by professionals who specialized in helping young people recover from situations of manipulation and isolation. Slowly, he began to regain confidence and a sense of independence, learning to establish healthy boundaries and rebuild connections with peers and family members outside the household. Support from extended family and selected friends proved essential, providing a stable environment where he could process his experiences without fear or judgment. Over time, the teenager's resilience became apparent, though the emotional scars of the household's dynamics remained a topic of careful attention for those helping him heal. In the neighborhood, the scandal left a lasting mark. Residents who had once considered the community a safe and predictable environment grappled with the realization that serious manipulation and control could exist behind closed doors. Conversations among neighbors shifted from casual gossip to deeper awareness of family dynamics and the importance of vigilance in protecting young people. Local organizations and schools took steps to educate parents, teachers, and students about the signs of manipulation, emotional abuse, and the importance of reporting concerns early. The case became a reference point for discussions on maintaining awareness while respecting privacy, highlighting how subtle patterns of control can escalate over time. The stepmom's actions and subsequent confession also prompted broader reflections on trust, appearances, and the difficulty of detecting hidden family dysfunction. Friends and acquaintances who had once admired her involvement in community events struggled with the dissonance between public image and private behavior. The case underscored the complexities of blended families and the sometimes hidden consequences of unequal power dynamics within a household. Professionals in psychology and social work noted the importance of addressing not just overt abuse, but also patterns of control and psychological manipulation that can have long-term effects on adolescents' development. Years later, the story of the family continued to serve as a cautionary tale. It was studied in local training programs for educators, counselors, and law enforcement officers as an example of how early signs of control and isolation can escalate if left unchecked. The teenager, now older and more self-assured, occasionally reflected on the experience as a turning point that shaped his understanding of boundaries and personal agency. The community, while still recovering from the shock, had become more vigilant and aware, recognizing that appearances can be deceiving and that maintaining open communication, observation, and intervention when necessary is essential. The scandal left an indelible imprint, highlighting the profound impact of manipulation within a family, the importance of support systems, and the necessity of exposing hidden truths to foster healing and prevent future harm.